My mother-in-law asked if I preferred cash or card as she handed me a bill for over $1,000, a birthday gift for her entire family. It was a dinner that threatened to cost me my marriage. The evening started with a lie, or, if I'm being generous, a catastrophic misunderstanding. My husband, Mark, had come home a week prior, a hopeful glint in his eye. "Mom's birthday is next Friday," he'd said, wrapping his arms around my waist. "I was thinking we could take her out somewhere nice. Just the three of us. Show her we appreciate her." I loved this idea. My relationship with my mother-in-law, Brenda, was polite. We existed in a state of carefully maintained neutrality. She thought I wasn't traditional enough for her son, and I thought she was a walking, talking, passive-aggressive Pinterest board. But for Mark's sake, I always put on my best smile. A quiet, intimate dinner at a nice restaurant sounded like the perfect, manageable gesture. We chose the Gilded Spoon, a place known for its 7-course tasting menu and wine list that was thicker than my college thesis. It was a special occasion spot, the kind of place you save up for. Mark made the reservation for 3, and I even bought a new dress. I was genuinely looking forward to it, hoping it might be a turning point for Brenda and me. My first clue that the evening was about to go spectacularly off the rails should have been when we arrived. The hostess smiled warmly. "Right this way, the rest of your party is already here." My brow furrowed. The rest of our party? I exchanged a confused look with Mark, who just shrugged. We were led into a private dining alcove, and my heart sank into my new heels. It wasn't just Brenda. Seated around a large circular table were her sister, Carol, Carol's husband, Bill, Mark's younger brother, Kevin, and his sister, Chloe, with her latest boyfriend, a guy who introduced himself as T-Bone. They were all beaming, glasses of champagne already in hand. Brenda stood up, her arms wide, a queen greeting her subjects. "There are my favorite children," she trilled, kissing Mark and giving me an air kiss that smelled faintly of expensive hairspray and judgment. I was so thrilled when Mark said you two were treating me for my birthday. I thought, why not make it a real family celebration? The more the merrier. She winked. Mark just smiled weakly, a cornered animal trying to play it cool. I could already feel a migraine starting behind my eyes. This was not just the 3 of us. This was an ambush. The ordering was a bloodbath. Brenda waved away the regular menus with a flick of her wrist. "Oh, no," she announced to the table. "We're all doing the chef's tasting menu. It's my birthday. We're not going to skimp." I saw the price on the menu insert, $150 per person. Before I could even process the math 8 people times 150, she turned to the sommelier. "And we'll start with 2 bottles of the Veuve Clicquot, and then you can recommend pairings for each course." My blood ran cold. The Veuve alone was over $100 a bottle. Mark, bless his conflict-avoidant heart, just nodded along, not wanting to cause a scene on his mother's birthday. I tried to catch his eye, to send a silent, screaming message of abort mission, but he was too busy being the good son. The meal was a blur of decadent, wallet-destroying opulence. Oysters arrived, then seared scallops, then foie gras. With every course, a new wine was poured. The table was loud, filled with laughter and stories, but I was trapped in a silent, personal horror movie. I watched as Kevin ordered a second lobster tail, just to try it. I watched as Chloe sent her wine back because it wasn't oaky enough, forcing the sommelier to open a more expensive bottle. I watched Brenda hold court, accepting compliments and gifts, all while acting as if this lavish feast had simply materialized out of thin air for her benefit. I ate my food, but it tasted like ash in my mouth. I was doing the math in my head over and over. With the wine, the extra courses, the cocktails they'd had before we even arrived, the number was climbing at an astronomical rate. It was well past what Mark and I had budgeted for our entire month of groceries. This wasn't a dinner. It was a down payment on a car. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the dessert plates were cleared. T-Bone was leaning back in his chair, patting his stomach. Carol was reapplying her lipstick. Brenda looked utterly content. "Well," she sighed happily, "that was just perfect." The waiter, a polished professional who had been nothing but attentive all night, approached the table with a sleek, black leather bill folder. My breath caught in my throat. He hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning the table, clearly unsure of who the host was in this chaotic group. He placed it delicately in the center of the table, an unexploded bomb waiting to detonate. An awkward silence fell. Everyone looked at it, No one moved. Bill cleared his throat and studied the ceiling. Kevin suddenly became fascinated by a scuff on his shoe. Then, with the practiced grace of a seasoned predator, Brenda reached out. But she didn't open the folder. She didn't pull out her purse. She slid the leather folder smoothly across the polished wood of the table, directly in front of me. I stared at it, my hands frozen in my lap. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I looked up at her, my expression a mask of disbelief. She met my gaze with a serene, beatific smile, the kind of smile you'd see on a saint in a stained glass window. Her eyes twinkled with a malicious sweetness as she leaned forward slightly, her voice just loud enough for the whole table to hear. "My dear," she cooed, tilting her head, "cash or card?" The world seemed to slow down. The ambient chatter of the restaurant, the distant clink of cutlery, it all faded into a low hum. Every eye at the table was on me. Carol, Brenda's sister, had a smug little smirk playing on her lips. Kevin looked down at his plate with a sudden, intense interest. Mark. I dared a glance at my husband. He was staring at his mother, his face pale, his mouth slightly agape like a fish. He was utterly, completely useless. The knight in shining armor I had married had apparently left his spine at home. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. It was a performance, and I was the unwilling star. Brenda's smile never wavered, her eyes holding mine in a challenge. "Go on," they seemed to say. "Make a scene. Prove you're the difficult, ungrateful shrew I've always told my son you are." My voice, when it finally came out, was a thin, reedy thing I barely recognized. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I said it to Brenda, but my eyes flickered to Mark, a desperate, silent plea. "Help me. Say something. Fix this." He just blinked, his paralysis complete. Brenda let out a little tinkling laugh, a sound like tiny shards of glass. "A misunderstanding, dear. How so? Mark was so clear when he told me you two wanted to treat me to a lovely birthday dinner. I just thought, since you were being so generous, that I'd share the love with the whole family." She placed a hand on her chest, a picture of maternal benevolence. "It's been so long since we were all together like this. It's your treat that brought us all together. So beautiful." The lie was so audacious, so masterfully woven with guilt and false sentiment that it almost took my breath away. She had twisted Mark's quiet, intimate dinner for 3 into a blank check for her entire clan, and she was framing it as my generosity. My hand trembled as I reached for the bill folder. I needed to see it. I needed to know the exact dimensions of the hole they expected me to dig for myself. I flipped open the black leather. The number at the bottom, printed in neat, unforgiving digits, made my stomach clench. It wasn't $1,000. It was worse. $1,147.38. A month's mortgage payment. The vacation to the coast we'd been saving for over a year. It was the cost of my husband's inability to say no to his mother. I looked at that number, and something inside me shifted. The shock and fear began to curdle, hardening into a cold, sharp anger. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a shakedown, a carefully orchestrated, family-approved mugging in a 5-star restaurant. "Oh, is it a lot?" Carol asked, her voice dripping with faux concern. "We just got so carried away with the celebration. You know how it is." Bill, her husband, nodded sagely. "You can't put a price on family memories." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him I could put a very specific price on this particular memory, and it was $1,147.38. I looked around the table at their expectant faces. They were all in on it. From Chloe's extra oaky wine to Kevin's bonus lobster tail to T-Bone's 3 rounds of aged scotch after dessert. They had come here with the explicit understanding that they would be eating and drinking on my dime. They were parasites, and Brenda was their queen. I closed the bill folder with a soft, definitive thump. I took a deep breath, letting the cold rage clear my head. Fine. They wanted a show? I'd give them one. I looked back at Brenda, my polite, strained smile gone, replaced by something much colder, much more deliberate. I saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes. This wasn't the reaction she'd been expecting. She expected tears, or a whispered, frantic argument with Mark. She didn't expect this sudden, icy calm. I reached into my purse, and for a heart-stopping moment, They probably thought I was reaching for my wallet. Instead, I pulled out my phone. I slid my thumb across the screen, my movements precise. I opened the calculator app and placed the phone on the table next to the bill. The bright screen lit up my face. "You're right, Bill," I said, my voice clear and carrying in the now silent alcove. "You can't put a price on memories, but we can certainly put a price on what everyone consumed tonight." I picked up the itemized bill, my eyes scanning the long list. I held it up. "Let's see. We have 8 tasting menus at $150 each. That's an even $1,200 before we even get to the drinks." I looked up, making eye contact with each and every one of them, a predator lining up its prey. "So, let's break it down, shall we?" "Brenda, dear," I started, my voice dangerously sweet. "You had 3 glasses of the Veuve and the wine pairings. That puts your total at about—" Brenda's serene smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then irritation. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice losing its sugary edge. It was like watching the Wicked Witch of the West begin to melt. I ignored her, tapping numbers into my phone's calculator with a theatrical slowness. "Let's see. 150 for the tasting menu plus, call it 75 for your share of the champagne and wine pairings. So Brenda, your grand total is a neat $225. Happy birthday." I gave her a brilliant, toothy smile that didn't reach my eyes. I then swiveled my gaze to Carol and Bill. They looked like deer caught in the headlights. "Carol, Bill," I chirped, my voice all business. "You two also had the tasting menu and the wine, so that's $450 for you lovely folks." I continued down the line, a cheerful, vengeful accountant of their gluttony. My finger traced the itemized list on the receipt. "Kevin, my man, tasting menu, $150, 2 extra lobster tails at $35 a pop. That's $70. And let's not forget the 3 old-fashioned cocktails you started with. We'll put your total at a respectable $285. Kevin's face had gone from smug to a blotchy, panicked red. He started to stammer something, but I held up a hand to silence him, my gaze already moving on. "Chloe, darling, and T-Bone." I gave the boyfriend a withering look. "Tasting menus plus the upgraded wine selection you insisted on, and T-Bone, your 3 glasses of 25-year-old Macallan come to $120 just on their own. So for the 2 of you, your bill comes to, let's call it $510. T-Bone choked on his water. Chloe looked like I had just personally insulted her dog. The entire table was staring at me in stunned silence. The festive atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by a thick, curdled tension. They were all looking at each other, then back at me, their expressions a mix of outrage and disbelief. I had broken the unspoken rule. I had taken their passive-aggressive, manipulative social game and smashed it to pieces with the blunt instrument of basic arithmetic. Finally, I turned to Mark, who was still sitting there, a statue of impotent misery. "And that just leaves us, honey," I said, my voice softening slightly, though the steel remained underneath. "Our 2 tasting menus, $300. I finished my calculations, turned my phone screen around, and pushed it towards the center of the table. The grand total on my calculator was slightly more than the bill, accounting for a generous tip for our long-suffering waiter. "There," I announced brightly. "All accounted for, see? That wasn't so hard." Brenda was the first to find her voice. It was low and venomous. I have never in all my life been so insulted. "Insulted?" I countered, raising an eyebrow. "I'm just trying to be clear. There was, as I mentioned, a misunderstanding. Mark and I invited you, Brenda, for a quiet birthday dinner. The 2 of us were going to treat you. We did not invite, nor did we agree to pay for, your sister, your brother-in-law, your other children, or T-Bone." I said his name like it was something I'd scraped off my shoe. "So, since everyone chose to enjoy the most expensive things on the menu under the mistaken impression that it was a free-for-all, I think it's only fair that everyone contributes their share." Carol scoffed, a nasty, sharp sound. "That's incredibly tacky. Who does that? Who invites people to dinner and then presents them with a bill? Who invites themselves to someone else's dinner and orders a $500 meal for 2? I shot back without missing a beat. She recoiled as if I'd slapped her. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Mark. "Honey, please," he whispered, his voice pleading. "Don't do this. It's Mom's birthday." I turned to him, and all the anger I felt towards his family suddenly focused on him, the architect of this disaster. "Don't you dare, Mark," I said, my voice a low, dangerous whisper just for him. "Don't you dare ask me to pay over $1,000 that we don't have because you are too scared to stand up to your own mother. You created this mess. You let her walk all over you, and you were fully prepared to let her walk all over me and our finances. This ends now?" He flinched and pulled his hand back, his face crumbling. For the first time all night, he looked truly ashamed. The waiter, sensing a situation spiraling into the abyss, reappeared at my elbow. "Is everything all right here, ma'am?" he asked, his professional calm admirable under the circumstances. I gave him a warm, genuine smile. "Everything is perfect, thank you." I looked back at the hostile faces around the table. "We're just figuring out how we'd like to split this." I reached into my purse again, but this time I pulled out my wallet. I took out 3 crisp $100 bills and placed them firmly on the table, on top of the bill folder. "This is for my meal and for Mark's meal," I announced. Then I slid another $225 next to it. "And this is our birthday gift to Brenda to cover her portion. Happy birthday, Brenda." I stood up, my chair scraping softly against the floor. I smoothed down my dress, feeling a strange sense of lightness, of liberation. I had faced the dragon and refused to be burned. I looked at Mark, my expression unreadable. "I'm ready to go when you are." But as I turned to leave, Brenda's voice, sharp as a whip, cut through the air. "You're not going anywhere. You're not leaving my son here to clean up the mess you made." She stood up, her face a mask of cold fury, and took a step towards me. "We're not finished here." I stopped, my back still mostly to the table, and slowly turned my head to look at her over my shoulder. "I made?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "You're the one who hijacked our dinner invitation and tried to stick me with a 4-figure bill. The only mess here is the one you created with your entitlement." My words hung in the air, sharp and clear. The other diners in the restaurant were starting to notice the drama unfolding in our alcove, their curious glances feeling like tiny pinpricks on my skin. Brenda's face flushed a deep, mottled red. She was used to being the puppet master, the one who pulled the strings with passive-aggressive comments and expertly deployed guilt. She wasn't used to being called out so directly. "How dare you speak to me that way in front of my family?" she hissed, taking another step closer. She was trying to intimidate me, to use her position as matriarch to force me back into line. Behind her, the rest of the family looked on, a tableau of shock and outrage. They were a pack, and she was their alpha. They were waiting to see if I would back down, if I would crumble under the pressure and apologize, pulling out my credit card to make it all go away. But the woman who had walked into this restaurant 3 hours ago, hoping for a quiet, pleasant evening, was gone. In her place was someone who had been pushed too far. I turned fully to face her, crossing my arms over my chest. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "And how dare you try to financially exploit your son and me under the guise of a birthday celebration?" I countered, my voice level and cold. "You want to talk about messes? Let's talk about the mess of expecting a young couple, who you know are saving for a house, to drop over $1,000 on a whim because you decided to be generous with our money. That's not a mess, Brenda. That's theft." The word theft landed with a satisfying thud. Carol gasped dramatically. Kevin looked like he was about to be physically ill. Mark finally moved. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly. "Mom, that's enough," he said, his voice shaking but firm. "She's right. This has gone too far." Brenda's head whipped around to face him, her eyes wide with betrayal. "Mark, are you taking her side against your own mother after everything I've done for you?" It was her trump card, the one she always played, the martyr mother, endlessly sacrificing for her ungrateful children. But tonight, it wasn't working. "This isn't about sides, Mom," Mark said, his voice gaining a bit of strength. "This is about what's right. We invited you to dinner. You invited everyone else without asking us, and you all ordered as if money was no object. That's not fair." He gestured to the money I had placed on the table. "Our meals are paid for, and your birthday gift is there. The rest," he looked around at his stunned siblings and aunt and uncle, "is on you." A furious, sputtering silence followed his declaration. The family looked at him as if he'd grown a second head. He had never, not once in his entire adult life, stood up to Brenda like this. I felt a swell of pride, but it was quickly overshadowed by the storm that was about to break. Bill, Carol's husband, was the first to crack. He was a portly man who valued appearances above all else. The idea of being caught in a restaurant unable to pay his bill was clearly his personal version of hell. "Now let's not be ridiculous," he blustered, pulling out his wallet. "Carol, honey, what did she say our share was?" His face was tight with humiliation. Chloe and T-Bone were furiously whispering, T-Bone's bravado completely gone as he stared at the $510 figure I had assigned him. He was probably doing the math on how many hours he'd have to work at whatever job he had to cover that. Slowly, resentfully, wallets and purses began to appear. There was a flurry of hushed, angry arguments, of cards being passed around, of cash being counted with shaking hands. It was a symphony of begrudging payment, and I was its conductor. I stood my ground watching them, making sure every last cent was accounted for. I wasn't leaving until that bill was settled. Brenda didn't move. She stood rigid, watching her family scrabble to pay for their extravagance, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Her perfect birthday party, her grand display of being the beloved matriarch treated to a lavish feast, had turned into a humiliating spectacle, and it was all my fault. Once the waiter had collected the various cards and cash and departed to process the payment, I finally looked at Mark. "I'm going," I said simply. I didn't wait for him. I turned and walked out of the alcove, my head held high. I could feel Brenda's eyes burning into my back. I didn't look back. I walked through the now bustling restaurant, past the curious stairs, and out into the cool night air. The valet brought my car around, and I slid into the driver's seat, my hands trembling with leftover adrenaline. A few moments later, the passenger door opened and Mark got in. He didn't say anything, just stared straight ahead through the windshield. The silence in the car was heavier than it had been at the dinner table. We drove for several blocks without speaking. The city lights blurred past the window. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if he was angry at me or proud of me or both. Finally, he let out a long, shuddering breath. "My phone hasn't stopped buzzing," he said, his voice hollow. I glanced over and saw the screen lighting up repeatedly in his hand. Texts, I assumed. From his mother, from his sister, from the whole angry clan. "They're furious," he continued. She says I have to choose." I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. "Choose?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He turned to look at me, and in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, I could see the anguish in his eyes. "She said if I walk back into our apartment with you tonight, then I'm no longer her son." I pulled the car over to the curb, bringing it to a sudden stop under the orange glow of a streetlight. I turned off the engine, and the ensuing silence was absolute. The ultimatum hung in the air between us, a toxic cloud threatening to suffocate everything we had built together. "She's no longer my son." The words echoed in my head. This was it. The final desperate power play from a woman who was used to getting her way. She was holding a gun to her own relationship with her son and daring me to be the one who pulled the trigger. I looked at Mark. His face was a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Pain, anger, exhaustion, and a deep, gut-wrenching sadness. For a moment, I saw the little boy who just wanted his mom to be happy, but I also saw the man who had finally, belatedly stood up for his wife, for his marriage, for himself. "So what are you going to do?" I asked quietly. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question. The road of our future had just forked, and I needed to know which path he was taking. He didn't answer right away. He just stared at his phone, which had finally gone dark. He swiped it open, and I saw a long, vitriolic wall of text from Brenda, followed by a string of missed calls. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind you take before you dive into cold water. "For my entire life," he began, his voice raspy, "my mom has used guilt and obligation like a currency. I sacrificed so much for you. Family is everything. Don't you want to make your mother happy? And I always paid. I always did what she wanted because it was easier than the fight. It was easier than the silent treatment, the dramatic sighs, the phone calls to my aunt and sister where she'd complain about how ungrateful I was. He finally turned to look at me, his eyes clear and resolved. "Tonight, when you stood up to them, I was terrified. My first instinct was to just smooth things over, to tell you to pay, to absorb the cost just to keep the peace, because that's what I've always done. But then I saw your face, and I realized the peace I was always keeping wasn't real. It was just quiet, and it was coming at your expense, at our expense." He reached across the console and took my hand. His was cold, but his grip was firm. "She's asking me to choose between my mother and my wife. But that's not the real choice, is it? The real choice is between the family I was born into and the family I chose to build with you. It's a choice between her manipulation and our partnership." A single tear traced a path down his cheek, but he wasn't crying out of sadness. It felt like a release. "Drive me home, please," he said, his voice stronger now. "To our home." I squeezed his hand, a wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy washing over me. I started the car and pulled back into the stream of traffic, the tension that had been coiled in my shoulders for hours finally beginning to unwind. When we walked into our apartment, it felt like a sanctuary. Mark immediately put his phone on silent and placed it face down on the kitchen counter, a small but significant act of defiance. He walked over to me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and buried his face in my hair. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry I put you in that position. I'm sorry it took me this long to see it. It will never happen again, I promise." The next few weeks were quiet. As predicted, Brenda cut off all contact. So did his siblings and his aunt. No angry calls, no manipulative texts, just a wall of stony silence. At first it was strange. Mark's phone, usually buzzing with family group chats and calls from his mom, was silent. Holidays and Sundays, which usually involved some obligatory family function, were suddenly free. And it was wonderful. We reconnected in a way we hadn't in years. We took that trip to the coast we'd been saving for. We had long, lazy weekends where the only plans we made were our own. We were a team, united and strong, forged in the fiery crucible of a 5-star restaurant. Mark went to therapy to learn how to set and maintain boundaries. He was unlearning a lifetime of conditioning, and it was hard, but he was doing it. For himself and for us. About 3 months after the dinner party, a card arrived in the mail. It was a birthday card for me, from Brenda. Inside, there was no apology, no acknowledgement of the $1,000 shakedown, just a simple printed happy birthday and her signature. Tucked inside was a $50 gift card to a generic coffee shop chain. It was a test, a pathetic, transparent olive branch designed to see if I would be the one to break the silence, to call and thank her, to open the door for her to come sweeping back in as if nothing had happened. Mark saw me looking at it, a complicated expression on my face. He took the gift card from my hand, walked over to the trash can, and dropped it in. "My dear," he said, mimicking his mother's condescending tone with a perfect, wicked grin. "Cash or card?" I burst out laughing, a real, genuine belly laugh. We had faced the dragon, and we had won. Our peace was no longer a fragile, quiet thing bought at an unreasonable price. It was something we had fought for together, and it was priceless.